At this time, I'm going to ask you all to be seated. We have a fireside chat featuring two prominent experts. State and local governments, as you know, juggle a constant threat of cyber and ransomware attacks with a mandate to handle growing amounts of citizens' personal data. So in our next panel, Gordon Bitko, currently with ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council, and formerly the FBI's Chief Information Officer, is going to join Dr. Michele Myauo of Accenture to discuss ways industry can support governments facing these threats by sharing risk information, assisting with incident response, and recommending best practices. So at this time, I will invite Dr. Myauo and Gordon Bitko up to the stage.
Oh, there's water there. Okay. Steve, thanks for the intro, and thank you all for having us here today. I know we're standing between you all here in a hot room and what I understand are ice cream sandwiches. And I know how cybersecurity people feel about free food anyway, so we'll try to use the time wisely, and hopefully it'll be informative. Michele, I thought we could start the conversation. We've heard a lot of great stuff from the governors and from Jim Weaver and from the state of North Carolina from the government perspective about cyber incidents and how states and local governments are thinking about and dealing with those. But I thought it would be really great to hear a little bit from the private industry perspective about what are the key lessons, what are the key observations, and what should state and local folks be taking away from it from the industry perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon, and thank you all for having me. What I would say the number one thing, and the gentleman from North Carolina spoke about this a bit. Oh, is my mic not? Is that better? Yeah, okay. Is be resilient, right? Be prepared for the day when a cyber attack does occur, and have an incident response plan and practice that plan, right? So you heard a really good implementation of that in North Carolina, of how they had a joint task force that all jumped in, had a plan, practiced their plan, and implemented incident response. Just like a firefighter would, you want to be prepared for that day. I'd also say on the resiliency side, ensuring that you have secure backups, right? So that way the time down from service is minimized for the constituents of the state. And what we see a lot across different state and local governments is a partnership, right? Public-public partnership, public-private partnership, because when you look at the cybersecurity workforce, there's over a 2.7 million cybersecurity workforce gap globally, and incident response folks are extremely hard to find and extremely expensive to employ, right? And the business of government is to serve the constituents. So I kind of equate it to doing your taxes, right? When you do your taxes, if you try to do them yourself, at least for me, yearly, it can be a struggle. But if you go to a tax accountant, they know the latest and greatest. They do this every day, all day. And that's what you see from a lot of the incident response shops in the private sector, right? All the different cloud companies, I've worked for one previously, Microsoft, have very robust incident response capabilities. That's the same for Amazon or Google or all the other major cloud vendors. When you look at all the different opportunities to partner with industry and different consulting houses, both large and small, to include Accenture, that have dedicated incident response folks globally that do this every single day, that can really partner with your states in order to share best practices and learn nuances of the incident response and structure of your states, and in order to get the job done. Thanks, Gordon. And I have my question on the phone here, so I'll go ahead and read it off. One big challenge facing state IT and cybersecurity officials is a lack of resources compared to their federal counterparts. What should state policymakers prioritize when marshaling resources while developing an enterprise-wide cybersecurity plan? Where can state governments realize the most bang for the buck in terms of cybersecurity?
Thanks, Michele. I think that there's a couple of key takeaways, and I'd like to build a little bit on the workforce point that you made And the discussion we heard from the North Carolina folks and we heard from Governor Hutchinson, everybody's struggling with resources, right? You all are short cybersecurity professionals. And so what do we do about that? I think this is a place where public-private partnerships really have to come to bear. And many of you here are in the military, so you've, I'm sure, heard the, train like you fight, right? And so that means work with the private sector, know how you're gonna do incident response because you don't have all the resources that you need. Not everybody is as prepared as North Carolina, and all the great stuff we heard from them about all the work that they've done, the incident response capability they've got. And when you're not in that position, you have to figure out other smart ways to get there. So I think that that's step one, is figure out who are those private sector partners. They're hard to find, they're expensive. Don't wait until the heat of the moment. You're gonna make a rash, quick decision then because you've got to pay a ransom or because you've got lost critical data. So I think that that's a really important piece of this. Think in advance about who you're gonna partner with, how, and work with them. So that's number one. Number two though, and it's the same thing, think about this in advance and work with industry who's really spent a lot of time thinking about this. What are your critical assets? I was really excited to hear Governor Hutchinson actually mention the concept of zero trust when he was up here talking. And that is the mentality that the federal government is moving to. It's a journey. It's not a one-day thing to snap your wrist, snap your fingers, and buy a piece of technology and say we're zero trust. It's a cultural thing. So I think that that's another place where you need to really start thinking about what is that journey and how do you prioritize your resources to know your critical assets? What's your most sensitive data? And what's the consequence going to be if it is lost? What are your key privileged users and how are you managing their identity and how are you ensuring effective access? And you can look through, there was somebody over here from CISA, they've published recently a zero trust maturity model. You can look through the elements of it and see where you are today and use that as a great tool to prioritize your resources, to prioritize where you're going to attack first. And I think that the last thing that I'll say about that is going back to my don't wait until the heat of the moment. I was having a conversation with my kids the other day because they heard the news that a school district had been victimized by a ransomware attack and had to end their school year early. My kids were disappointed to find that that wasn't their school district, that they still had to actually go to school and take their final exams. But when you're teenagers, I guess, you look for whatever outs you can get, right? But that's a perfect example of why you need to think about this. Why was that school district in a position where in the heat of the moment, they had no choice other than to cancel the last couple of weeks of school, right? And think about the cost and the consequences to that. Don't wait until that happens. I know it sounds trite, but there is nothing like having the tabletop exercises and thinking through the responsibility and who's going to do the work. When are you going to call a private sector organization to help you? When are you going to rely on your own internal capabilities? And if you can't do that, then you need to start doing it. You need to have those answers today, not when the incident happens. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that particular question.
Yeah, no, I think that was really good. The other things I would kind of just build off of that was, in addition to be resilient, get strategic and embed security, right? When we look at the $1 billion of state and local funding coming down for cybersecurity, it's a really good opportunity to take a look at your cybersecurity plan. Nodding to the intelligence community and the Department of Defense and the feds, they've been on this journey for quite a while. And they've learned quite a lot, right? There's a lot of really great standards. There's the NIST CSF, there's NIST 853, there's the Zero Trust Architecture, and then there's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification that all DoD defense industrial-based folks that work with the Department of Defense will need to be CMMC certified. And within those standards, there's a lot of really great best practices that state and local governments can adopt. I would say it's as you all know, your CISOs, it's an evolution, right? NIST 853 is kind of foundational, and then you can build off that with Zero Trust Architecture, and then CMMC kind of formalizes that. And we're seeing a lot of educational institutions and research houses within educational institutions starting to really get on board and embrace CMMC because that's coming down the path. So I'd say, leverage this opportunity and time with this federal funding coming down to really develop your plan. It's going to be a multi-year journey, as you see with the federal government, right? And develop your PMO, your program management office, so that way you can effectively program these funds throughout the 4 years and beyond, and then also measure your success against that. And my second point would be that that doesn't all have to be net new, right? By embed security in everything you do really means you have a lot of projects in flight, right? Whether you're upgrading to a new ERP's solution, whether you're migrating part of your assets to the cloud, all of these things have, as you all know, cybersecurity within them and security concerns within them. So this is a really good opportunity to kind of take a look at the projects that you have in flight and programatize that and formalize that into this plan that you can then program out and prioritize your investments against.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, the no net new is a really important takeaway for me from an industry perspective. There are already so many requirements being levied on industry for cybersecurity, and that's coming from government, from the federal government. It's coming from particular industries, financial services and healthcare and others, which have their own requirements about data sensitivity. And every time a new one of those happens, the proliferation of that makes dealing with government challenging, and it makes government dealing with industry challenging. So the more we can streamline that, the more you can look to the requirements that are already out there that are going to deliver secure services, secure products, and meet your needs, and not be of the mindset that you have some custom, unique, special thing in your state. Everybody's got unique challenges. There's no doubt about that. It's a question of how do you balance those and the risk of those with the taking advantage of what's already out there and what you can benefit from without inventing new things, because that will help you get maximum output, will help you leverage the resources that are being applied to cybersecurity and other places to your benefit. So Michelle, I think this has been some good background, but really what I wanted to turn to is, what does effective public-private partnership actually look like? What can government and industry be doing together to share best practices, to work together? Because we all know, what did Jim say, 13 billion incidents, events a year occurring in the state of North Carolina? Right? We all know that there are overwhelming numbers of these things going on all the time. So what should we be looking to do together?
Yeah, I would say, as with the basis of most relationships in our life, it all kind of stems from trust, right? Trust that these folks around you, these vendors, these other government agencies are really in it for the same mission, right? And in the end, our goal is to, increase security and resiliency so that way our friends and family are more safe. So finding partners that you can trust, and you trust that they're bringing you the best value solution, they're bringing you options, it's a real kind of collaboration and back and forth, I think is first and foremost, because without a basis of trust, it makes it really difficult to work and partner together. I would say the other piece is, and I know, sometimes, folks can look at industry and be like, well, it's easy for you to say, right? When you look at the cybersecurity landscape, as we all know, cybercrime costs us $2.9 million a minute globally. I share that because there's plenty of pie for all the, different industry vendors, as well as plenty to do amongst states. So if we can all just kind of work together and share best practices, just like cyber attackers are sharing best practices, to kind of build each other up and work together, then I think that would help us go a long way. And I think these shared standards by the federal government, as well as this IIJA funds that are coming down, kind of puts us all in the same position in the movie at the same time. We might be at different states of our security journey, but we're all in this together. So the more that we can talk and collaborate and attend and speak with each other at events like this, I think the better. How about you, Gordon? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. To add on to that, I think one of the things that I've seen recently that's been most effective is the way the federal government dealt with sharing threat intelligence at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. It was really novel in the way that they were actively sharing and disseminating, not just general information, because I've been on both sides of that coin, and I know when you're out there and you get the general threat intelligence bulletins that the government puts out for cyber historically, when you're in industry, you look at that and it's a dollar short, it's a day late. It doesn't tell you anything actionable that you knew and you could do anything about. But that actually changed now, right? In the war, at the start of the war, there was actual actionable information coming out from the government being declassified and disseminated, and in classified environments being shared as well in ways that we hadn't done previously. So I look at that, and that goes to your point, Michele, about trust. Right? That comes from, there was a decision made that we were going to do that because the trust that we had to have that we were all pointed towards the same objective and the same mission overweighed the risk of sharing that information. We've got to find a way to make that a common standard practice. It can't be the exception that it only happens during a war. It's got to become the norm, because the reality is those cyber activities are happening every day. It's not just the invasion of the Ukraine by Russia that triggers it, but it's ongoing all the time. So how do we get there? How do we build on the tools and processes to share that? And I think that means working more together. That means industry figuring out how to work together with government to be part of the joint task forces like the North Carolina folks were talking about. It's great that they're doing that. It would be even more powerful if there were regular ongoing industry participants talking about technical solutions and challenges and things that they were sharing and providing a bi-directional sharing of information. I see that starting to happen at the federal level at CISA with the JCDC, and that's great. And the question for states and others is, how do we share that more broadly? How do we leverage that more broadly? How do we do that more broadly? So I think that's one thing from my perspective that's really important. A second thing that I want to pivot to talk about is, and this isn't meant to be a sales pitch, but to figure out how to leverage commercial best practices to leverage those products. And I understand, you see a vendor come talk to you and it's a sales job, and your initial reaction is, well, they're just trying to sell their product. I totally get that, but I've been on the other side of the coin too, and I can tell you, looking back in retrospect, the cost every time you say, I'm going to build something custom for myself. That might meet your immediate needs. It might even in the short term be a preferred solution for you because it satisfies some customer in your agency or in some other agency in ways that you can't get with the commercial product. But whoever, when they do that, is thinking about what happens 5 years from now when we've got to maintain that, and the resources that are involved with that, and the cost of that customization. When I was at the FBI as the CIO, this is going to sound incredibly mundane, a time and attendance system, but it was so customized because the FBI thought it was special and different and needed to track 1,000 different things that agents might do in ways that they could report back to Congress. And so rather than just being able to use the standard time and attendance system, there was an incredibly customized system. Well, derived from a commercial product, but so customized that when the vendor would put out updates for that, we couldn't deploy them. It would literally break the environment that we had. And so every time that happened, because we were so committed to it, we had to spend thousands and thousands of, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars adapting that customization back and maintaining it. When really what we should have done at some point is say, we need to find another better, smarter way to track all this information that Congress is expecting us to report and share that in some other smarter way and leverage commercial best practices. We don't need to rely on a solution that was derived 30 years ago as the decision for how the FBI was going to track its personnel time and attendance. Let's find a modern solution. That happens, you all know it. It happens everywhere, in every agency, in every government I've ever seen. And we have to stop doing that. The cost of doing that is exorbitant, and it takes away your critical resources from being able to do cybersecurity. So if you're a CIO, if you're a CISO, and somebody comes to you and says, we need to build a custom solution, make them prove it. Make them prove what the real value is to their organization, to you, and how are they going to plan for that in out years. Not just we need it today, but what's it look like to maintain that, to support that, to drive that, and do we have the workforce, do we have the resources, do we have the ability to maintain that in perpetuity? Because think about that piece of it too. You might have the funding for that transformation today, but do you have the O&M to do that next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now and 50 years from now? Because that's what you're signing yourself up for. You all probably have got systems that are that old, right? Who thought about the cost at the time? So I think that's the second key point that I really want to make. And then the last point that I want to make, and then I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. I was fortunate enough to have a conversation a couple weeks ago with Chris Inglis, who's now the National Cyber Director. And his mindset is we have to get past we're just going to react, right? So there's a cultural shift that he's looking for. And that's not going to happen overnight. There's no doubt we're all going to be reacting probably forever to new cyber incidents. But the default expectation has to be what Michele said before. Design security in from the beginning. Work with industry partners to design security in from day zero on the project. And do it in ways that allow you to say, we are at a zero trust standpoint. Even if something bad does happen, it's okay because there's no cost, or there's minimal cost, and we know how we're gonna recover. And that's a huge mindset shift, but I think that that's absolutely essential, and only something that government and industry can do by working together. It's not one or the other. So I think we've got a few minutes left on the counter here. I don't know if there's any questions. We're certainly happy to take those. Like I said, we're standing between you and Steve, the ice cream sandwiches, right? Apparently the ice cream sandwiches are winning out. Okay.
As a state emergency manager in Idaho, we've done a really good job of reaching out to all the critical sectors across our infrastructure. We know who the private sector is to move transportation goods. We understand who it is that we need for grocery chain supply. We know who it is for energy. We can go through communication. Tell me who it is on the private sector side that we would want in our emergency operations center during this time.
Yeah, great question. I think the answer is they have there isn't a single answer to that question, but they have key technology partners, right? They have people who are mission critical for those agencies, and you've got to have that discussion with them and understand what piece of that technology is so critical to that energy supplier or to that grocery supplier that they have to be in the conversation with you and work with them, build that relationship, build that trust, right? It's not, unfortunately, private sector is not monolithic. It's not going to be one person that you can point to in every company and say, well, we need the CISO or we need the CIO, but have that conversation and what is most critical about their own operations that needs to be a part of that conversation. And bring them in and make them a part of the solution. Like I said, not when the incident happens and then you're trying to figure out who is it in that company, who is it in that sector, right? Figure that out and now. I wish I could give you a specific name, number, email address that you could reach out to, but unfortunately, there's some legwork everybody has to do to figure that out. The other thing, though, that I'll say to that is this is a place, and then Michele, definitely over to you for your thoughts. This is a place where look at where CISA is going and where the federal government is going, because there is now for critical industry, there is statutory incident reporting requirements that the law just passed. It's going to take CISA a little while to put in place the regulations, but it's coming. And so all of those industries are going to be required to statutorily to report to CISA. And there's some definitions, and the regulations still have to define exactly who's covered and how much time do they have to decide a major incident has occurred to report it. But that's coming. And so as companies are doing that work in response to the regulations, I think that's going to give you a great belly button for who to work with.
Yeah, I would just add that to echo what Gordon said, when you look at your technology stack, I'm sure you have multiple vendors within your environment. Reaching out to them, identifying, they all have incident response teams, I would hasten to guess, right? Typically, all the large vendors do have dedicated incident response folks. Share that scenario with them, bring them into your task force, establish a regular cadence to make them part of the team at appropriate times, of course, right? We all understand that there'll be times where it's government only and times where it's appropriate for industry to participate, but we see that very, very often when looking at industry. Back when I was at Microsoft, I supported incident response teams, and a lot of the large multinational companies, right? They're looking at global operations, and they have 20, 40, 50 different vendors. So establishing that PMO and that task force of who needs to be there from all your various vendors, and what role they need to play, and developing that plan and then exercising that plan is something that could be very beneficial to you, because I imagine they'll be just kind of jumping to assist you.
Just to add to that point, Michele, one of my favorite things in my old job was to do a tabletop exercise and to reveal the gaps in these sort of things now. So the tabletop exercise has to include those critical industry sectors. and make them identify who's going to participate. And when you find out as a result of the tabletop exercise what didn't work, because if you didn't find things that didn't work, you didn't do a good tabletop exercise, right? Use that to learn, use that to figure out, okay, in this particular company, in this particular sector, these are the people who we need to have in the room because they couldn't make the decision without that person. And the tabletop exercise showed a failure. It showed that we were not going to be able to respond in time and prevent whatever catastrophic scenario the exercise is going to play out, right? So do that and bring in industry partners and use that to learn and figure out who those relationships should be with and make that part of the standard operating procedure with those sectors. I think there was an...
NASIO does a study every 2 years with Deloitte. In the cybersecurity study that was done in 2020, the statistic was very interesting. Only 8 states have high level of confidence that they trust the cybersecurity practices of their private sector partner. And that, in fact, that has been declining. What are your thoughts on that? Why is public sector not trusting the cybersecurity practices of private sector partners?
I think trust is earned, right? It's very important for the different vendors to earn your trust, quite frankly, to answer your questions, not to evade them, to bring you options. So I think trust, again, not to be too simple, but sometimes keeping it simple works, is at the heart of that. And we want to gain your trust because there's an opportunity. This is an evolving field, right? It's okay to fail. We're all going to fail. We don't move forward without failure. Now, what we need to do is we need to fail fast. We need to fail cheaply. But I think evolving as we evolve our cybersecurity practices, what works today will not work tomorrow. We all know that, right? So just having that growth mindset and that mindset of this is an innovative field. We need everybody. I mean, when you look at cybersecurity, there's over 200 job titles, right? Anything from a cyber lawyer to an incident responder to a reverse engineer, which I like to call unicorns with rainbow sprinkles because they're so hard to find. I think just kind of the more we talk about cybersecurity and the more that we talk to each other about our best practices and our challenges and our failures and our successes, then we'll earn that joint trust, and then it'll be more natural for us to work together, and hopefully we can get those numbers up.
Yeah, from my perspective, why trust is declining and it was low and is declining is obvious. It's Colonial Pipeline, it's Solar Winds, it's companies that didn't have the cybersecurity practices that they should have had, and when things happened, they were not upfront and straightforward in dealing with them. And that's a thing that corporate culture has to evolve in some sectors. I think in other sectors, it's already much better than that. But like Michele said, we have to work together to build up trust. I'm going to go back to the answer that I just gave, the tabletop and putting people together in the same room and having them work together to solve these problems. And I know that there's an expectation that, again, that industry is going to use that as an opportunity to try to sell things. But if you don't position it that way, if you position it as we're all here collectively together because we see the cost when these things do happen, and you technology providers are part of the solution and share some of the responsibility, then I think you can build some of that trust. But it's not a one-time thing. It's not a quick fix. And I think that some of that lies on the other side of the coin as well. One of the reasons why it is challenging from an industry standpoint is government changes, right? The priorities change. A new CIO comes in, or a new governor comes in, or a new agency head at the federal level comes in, and they want a new strategy, they want new priorities, they want new policy. And so there's a lack of continuity on that side as well. I think that's something, again, can only be worked on collectively. Yeah.
Matt Kirby down from Alaska. Apologize, I'm on the red eye last night, so if this is a little mumbly, that's why. Great discussion so far. I'm very passionate about integrating private sector, whole estate approach. And you're already kind of touching on the nature of my question is, with the tabletop exercises and TTXs, what are some really tangible, specific things you have seen to make them more sticky and more effective? I'm like the operations officer for Alaska, and so I'm looking to be planning some of these cyber exercises and really integrate the whole estate and the interorganizational, the private sector. And so I'm really curious for like best practices, things you've seen that help build that trust, to help get the private organizations in and just to partner with the state to make the response that much better when it happens. So anything like just specifics that you guys have.
Sure. First off, on the clothing thing, I think as warm as it is in here, you were the smart one. So no argument there. What I've seen work, what worked well for me is getting leadership at the highest levels involved, having the governor, having senior-most people participate, and not just as lip service that they show up for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, but that they actually commit the time. I think you have to have that from a cultural standpoint, and not just the governor, but other people in the state who are going to be involved in the process. For me, that's a huge part of what makes it successful, is that self-evident commitment that it's a priority at the senior-most levels in the organization, in the state.
And I would, thanks for the question, I would add on that and say, planning, right? Planning that exercise, taking a look at like what the Department of Defense does with their tabletop exercises program that they typically do yearly and more often, and taking those best practices in. And then also kind of getting 360-degree feedback around, right? Like you definitely want the key stakeholders there, so that way folks know this is important and this is serious. However, you want the doers there too, right?
Yep.
You want the people on the ground that when they see the alert, they know what to do and they can help you with what really occurs on the ground. So kind of stepping out of also kind of a hierarchical structure, within this space, it's a safe space. Although you report to me, please tell me how this goes. Just creating that kind of structure and sharing can go a long way, because at the end, we're all people, right? No matter what our title is, we're all people, we're all trying to solve the same challenge. And then after action, doing something with it. When people see that a plan comes out of that, an action plan comes out of that, and change happens, people want to be part of that. So thank you.
Yeah, just to really add on to that, because we're on negative time now according to the clock, which I think means we're about done. But I think being transparent about that after action, and not just putting it on the shelf or putting it under a table, but saying we got these results and now we have a strategy of what are we going to do to fix it. And being transparent to all the stakeholders and being clear with, because you've got appropriators that you've got to deal with, ultimately say we need resources, here's why, we did this, what worked, what didn't work. This is what's driving our policy as a result.